So hi everyone, it's Wisdom Jordan right back here, and this is lesson 8 of Forex trading. So in this lesson 8, we are going to be looking at Forex trading sessions. So the Forex market can be broken up into 4 major trading sessions, and that's the Sydney session, Tokyo session, London session, New York session. So below are tables of open and close times of each session. So I want you to pause the video and then you look at those times, or maybe you take a screenshot. So during summer, we have here the time zone, then EST stands for Eastern Standard Time, then GMT stands for Greenwich Mean Time. So we have the Sydney Open. This is when the Sydney session opens, and then you have the Sydney closes when the Sydney session closes. We have the Tokyo Open. That's the time when the Tokyo session opens, and then we have the Tokyo session close. Then we have the London session open and the London session close, New York open, and then the New York close. During winter, also we have different times, and you have the Sydney, etc, etc. I want you to take a small pause of the video, you look at those times, and then we continue. You can take a screenshot and memorize later. So you can see that in between each session, there is a period of time where the two sessions are open at the same time. For example, from 3 to 4 is EST, that is Eastern Standard Time. The Tokyo session and the London session overlap from 8 a.m. to 12, and then EST, London session, and New York session overlap. Naturally, these are the busiest times during the trading day because there is more volume when two markets are open at the same time. This makes sense because during those times, all market participants are active, which means that more money is transferring hands. So when the US shifts 1 hour back, Sydney actually moves forward by 1 hour. Seasons are opposite in Austria. You should always remember this if you ever plan to trade during that time. So we want to look at the average pip movement. So we want to look at the average pip movement. Average pip movement of major currency pairs during each trading session. So this data is a little bit old, but it still counts for that. Euro USD during the Tokyo session moves less compared to the London session and the New York session. So I want you to be comparing these volumes, and then you see that Euro USD moves best during the London session and the New York session. And then we can also have a greater look that the London session has more pip movements within the major currency pairs, simply because the London session has the major pip movement, and then followed by the New York session. It has also good pip movements, then followed by the Tokyo session. So we are going to start off by looking at the Tokyo session in a little bit of detail. So the opening of the Asian session at 7 p.m. marks the start of the Forex clock. Tokyo session is sometimes referred to as Asian session because Tokyo is the financial capital of Asia. Hope we are together. I want you to note, action isn't only limited to Japanese showers. Tons of Forex transactions are made in other financial hotspots like Hong Kong, Singapore, and Sydney during the Tokyo session. The main market participants during the Tokyo session are the commercial companies, into bracket exporters, and central banks. Remember, Japanese economy is heavily export dependent, and China also being a major trade player, there are a lot of transactions taking place on a daily basis. Liquidity can sometimes be very thin. There will be times when trading during this period will be like fishing, so you might have to wait a long time before getting a nibble. So we are looking at the Tokyo session still. It is more likely that you will see stronger moves in the Asian Pacific currency pairs like Aus dollar during the Tokyo session, the New Zealand dollar, as opposed to non-Asian Pacific pairs like GBP dollar. So during those times of thin liquidity, most pairs may stick within a range. We shall look at this more in trading. This provides opportunities for short day trades or potential breakout trades later in the day. We shall be looking at that in strategies. Most of the action takes place early in the session when more economic data is released. Moves in Tokyo session could set a tone for the rest of the day. I want you to note that. Traders in the later session will look at what happened during the Tokyo session and help them organize and evaluate what strategies to take in other sessions. Typically, after big moves in the preceding New York session, you may see consolidation during the Tokyo session. So Tokyo session always has bigger consolidations. All right, so we are moving forward. We are still looking on the Tokyo session. Which pairs should you trade during the Tokyo session? Tokyo session is when news from Austria, news from New Zealand from Japan come out. This presents a good opportunity to trade news events. Also, there could be more movement in yen pairs as lot of yen is changing hands as Japan companies are conducting business. Take note that China is also an economic superpower. So whenever news come out from China, it tends to create volatile moves. When Austria and Japan rely heavily on Chinese demand, we could see greater movement in Aussie and yen pairs when Chinese data comes in. All right. So we are still continuing. Now we are going to look at the London session. So because the London session crosses with the two major trading sessions, and the London session being such a key financial center, a large chunk of Forex transactions take place during this time. This leads to high liquidity and potentially lower transaction costs or lower PIP spreads during the London session. Due to the large amount of transactions that take place, the London trading session is normally the most volatile session. I want you to note that. The London session is the most volatile. It has the lower PIP spreads and it has lower transaction costs. So most trends begin during the London session and they typically will continue until the beginning of the New York session. Volatility tends to die down in the middle of the session as traders often go off to eat lunch before waiting for the New York trading period to begin. All right, so trends can sometimes reverse at the end of the London session as European traders may decide to lock in profits. I hope we are still together. So we are still looking at we have been looking at the London session. Now we are looking at the New York session. There is high liquidity in the morning as it overlaps with the European session. Most economic reports are released near the start of the New York session. Remember 85% of all traders involve the dollar. So when big time US economic data is released, it is the potential to move the markets. Once European markets are closed shop, liquidity and volatility tends to die down during the afternoon US session or the New York session. There is very little movement during the Friday afternoon. Also, Fridays, there is a chance of reversal in the second half of the session as US traders close their positions ahead of the weekend in order to limit exposure to weekend news and charges for holding. So we are still looking at the New York session. So which pairs should you trade during the New York session? Take note that there will be a ton of liquidity as both US and European markets will be open at the same time. This allows you to trade virtually any pair, although it would be best if you stuck to the major and minor pairs and avoid those weird ones. Also, because the US dollar is on the other side of the majority of the transactions. Everybody will be paying attention to the US data that is released. Should these reports come in better or worse than expected, it could dramatically change the markets as the dollar will be jumping up and down. So we are going to look at session overlaps. So we want to start by the Tokyo London overlap. So liquidity during the session is pretty thin for a few reasons. Typically, there isn't much movement during the Asian session, and within the European traders just starting to get into their offices. Trading can be boring as liquidity dries up. This would be an ideal time to take a chill, look for potential trades to take for the London and New York sessions. So we want to look at the London, New York overlap. This is the busiest time of the day as traders from the two largest financial centers, London and New York, begin to work out. It's during this period where we can see some big moves, especially when news reports from US and Canada are released. Markets can also be hit by late news coming from Europe. If any trends were established during the European session, we could see the trend continue as US traders decide to jump in and establish their positions after reading up what happened earlier in the day. You should watch out though at the end of this session as some European traders may be closing their positions, which could lead to some choppy moves right before lunchtime in the US. All right, I hope we are still together. What you don't understand, please comment in the video. So, what are the best days to trade? From the chart below, it would be best to trade during the middle of the week, since this is when the most action happens. Then Friday is usually a half a day. So when you look at Monday, right here, Monday is not a good day because most people are just watching up what happened last week. When you have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, those are the busiest days of the week. And then Friday, it is not so good. So the best days are the middle, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So what are the best times to trade? So when two sessions are overlapping, these are also times when major news events come out, potentially spark some volatility and directional moves. The European session tends to be the busiest out of the three, and the middle of the week typically shows the most movement as the range widens most of the major currency pairs. The best times to trade, we have agreed, that's in the middle of the week and when two sessions are overlapping. And then the European session is the busiest of the three sessions, followed by the New York session. So what are the worst times to trade? We have Fridays, liquidity dies down during the later part of the US session. We have holidays, everyone is taking a break. We have major news events. These may be unpredictable, so you can avoid news sometimes if you don't know where the market is going to head. So during a public holiday, American Idol, NBA Finals, Super Bowl, etc., stuff like that, you can also try to avoid such scenarios. So in the next lesson, this is the end of lesson 8. In the next lesson, we are going to be looking at how to read a Forex code. We're going to look at a code conversion, SIP rate, pips, fractional pips, transactional costs, the loads, dollar value per pip, margin trading, leverage, rollover. They are all explained in lesson 9. So thank you for watching this video. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel if you want to become a professional Forex trader or investor. My name is Jordan. See you in the next lesson. Bye bye. May the markets be with you.